Google is the biggest search engine on the planet, and it's not even close. You know what Google's global market share is on search? 91%. You know this, I know this, because I don't even search for things anymore. I Google things.
Just Google it.
Just Google it.
Google it, Google it, Google it. Please Google it. Google is free, Google it.
But in the United States, where Google just lost a landmark antitrust lawsuit, a judge has decided it became the biggest and the best by cheating, by breaking the law.
A federal judge has found that tech giant Google broke antitrust laws, acting illegally to maintain a monopoly in online search.
So yes, Google is a verb. Not always for the better.
This is Lemon. You mind if I Google myself in your office?
Sure, Tracy.
Can I use your computer?
How else are you gonna do it?
And it hasn't played fair. But here's the thing that'll really blow your mind. Google's closest competitor in the US right now, Microsoft, you know them, right? Second most valuable company in the world, market cap over $3 trillion. They created Bing.
Okay, well, I guess my work here is done. I'll let Bing take over from now.
Their market share, just 7%. And what most people don't understand is just how far Google has gone to force its competitors out of the picture, how many billions of dollars it spent to do it, and how utterly hopeless it all was that Microsoft once offered Apple 100% of its search ad revenue to dislodge Google as its default search engine, and Apple said no. More on that later.
Google is a very dominant search engine.
In the judge's words, Google is a monopolist and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. I'll show you how. The entire case against Google revolves primarily around one thing: the absolutely immense advantage you get when you're the default choice. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I open up a tab here and I type in a question just directly into the search bar, it doesn't really matter what I type. What does a giraffe look like? You'll see right here, it says Google search. I didn't tell it to search on Google specifically, and I never told my browser that I prefer Google. It just kind of assumes that I'm a Google guy. The same is true if I go to Firefox. What does a pig eat? Again, search with Google. It's still defaulting to Google. If I use my phone's default search widget, I can notice right away that it's going to query Google. Even Samsung's native search widget, if I click it right here, I can see it's taking me to Google. The same is true on all Apple devices, iPhones, Macs, laptops. If you ask Siri a question, it's checking Google. Just about the only place Google isn't the default choice is on Microsoft's Edge browser, where Bing is king. And the point here is that Google's search dominance has become virtually impossible to challenge because of this highly prized default status.
Defaults are hugely important because even though they're kind of easy to change, you can go into the settings and change your default search engine or change your default browser on your phone or your computer. A lot of people don't do that.
There is an entire branch of behavioral economics devoted to what's called default bias, how consumer choice is heavily influenced by how those choices are presented or not presented at all. And in his decision, the judge notes this bit of expert testimony. The vast majority of individual searches or queries are carried out by habit. That is to say, search is so integrated into our lives. Like we do it without thinking. Most people might not even stop to consider that there is a default search engine at all. And Google counts on this. Google's own behavioral economics team wrote in 2021, inertia is the path of the least resistance. People tend to stick with the status quo as it takes more effort to make changes. That's the power of defaults. And Google won that coveted status, denying its competitors a major opportunity by handing over a ton of money. The judge in this decision notes that by far the biggest way to get search clients is through this default distribution. And what Google has done is offer to share the ad revenue it gets from search results with those companies that agree to give Google default status.
Google struck these deals with distribution partners like Apple to basically get the default status as the main search engine, the search engine that you see front and center everywhere you go on your iPhone. In exchange, Apple got a portion of the revenue that came from the searches that people ran on iPhones.
It's a lot of money. It's like the equivalent of more money than a lot of countries make in a given year.
In 2021, Google handed over $26.3 billion in revenue share, which Google lists as tax or traffic acquisition costs. Apple gets the vast majority of that money. In 2022, an estimated $20 billion. And just to give that number a frame, that amount was almost 1/5 of Apple's entire operating profit for the year. So that's a lot of money, right? And you know Mozilla, they make Firefox. Google gave them about $400 million in 2021 under a similar deal. That was 80% of Mozilla's operating budget. To underline the point, Mozilla, as we know it, would not exist without Google.
Companies are hugely reliant on Google because Google is just minting so much money from its search engine. It's just such a hugely profitable endeavor that Google has a lot of money to throw around, and no one else in the search ecosystem can match that.
Google also pays huge sums of money to phone manufacturers. They demand a lot in return. So for example, Samsung has a deal with Google. They have to have a deal with Google in order to load Google's apps onto their phones at all. But they also have to feature those apps in prominent positions. What's more, things like Google Search or Google Chrome can't be deleted by the user. You see right here, it says disable. Normally that should say uninstall. And if they didn't agree to Google's terms, good luck with your phone that can't even run the Google Play Store, which is how the vast majority of Android users download any app at all.
In order to use Android, you really need to have the Google Play Store. That's how all users get apps. Without that, you just basically have a dumb phone with nothing on it.
Samsung does have its own Galaxy Store, but when have you ever used that? Microsoft devices even apparently opted not to include their own Bing search widget on their own phones because the Google search widget had to be preloaded according to their deal, and they thought having two search widgets would be weird. As one Microsoft executive told the court, I do remember us having some conversations that from a user interface standpoint, it would be really confusing if there were two boxes there and it wouldn't be a good product for the user. These sorts of deals, according to the judge, had what he calls an exclusionary effect. Google gets exclusivity simply by virtue of how much money it can throw around.
Where Google broke the law in this case, according to the judge, is the contracts, that these contracts were unlawful, that Google had so much money, so much data, so much market share that it could basically will itself onto devices.
It's the exclusive nature of this that is really problematic. And the judge said that that has the effect of blocking all of the other search engines from having any opportunity to get the sort of scale and data that they would need to improve their search engine.
And what's surprising is how even the richest companies in the world couldn't compete. Here's what really shocked me when I was reading the judge's decision in this case. In 2015, Microsoft actually tried to make a deal with Apple. Give us preferred status, make Bing the default search engine, and we'll give you 90% of all the money we make in search ad revenue. Apple said no. Microsoft then came back with an even more surprising deal. Okay, we'll give you 100% of Bing revenue. Or hell, maybe you guys can just buy Bing from us to make it the default search engine, and Apple still said no.
Google is the dominant search engine. It is the thing people recognize. It is the thing people trust.
Microsoft tried to make the case that it was in Apple's best long-term interests for Google and Microsoft to be competitive. But from Apple's point of view, even a high percentage, like 100% of a low number, still ends up being a low number. And I'll show you what I mean. It's just basic math. So, I have a blue circle here. Let's say that's Microsoft's search ad revenue. Then I've got a whole bunch of green circles. Let's say that's Google. 100% of these blue circles is still only one circle. But 50% of these green circles, now there's a deal. Google drives insane volume. Billions of search queries a day. And even if Google is only sharing, like, let's say, a third of its ad revenue with Apple, no amount of ad revenue from any company could even hope to compare.
You have to imagine that Apple figured that if they tried to put Bing on phones, that there would be a lot of people upset because Bing might not work as well as Google in their view, or it just looks like something cheap, like Apple went with the number 2 instead of the number 1. Why would you do that?
And here's where Google's monopoly really starts to spin up into overdrive. Its competitive advantage keeps compounding on itself. What has turned out to be a very effective cycle for Google is securing these exclusive contracts, which help it find more users. It's like the whole world uses Google. And every time you do, Google learns something about you. It learns what kind of things you like to search for, how long you hover on specific results, which links you actually click, how often you go back to the search page after clicking away, your scrolling patterns, your location data, even the seasonality of your searches. Google, by default, stores 18 months of your search history and activity, which is immensely expensive, but also lucrative because it takes all that data and uses it to constantly improve its search algorithms. So, for example, it understands that when you Google something like White House, for example, you're not actually looking for houses that are white. It also knows that if you search for giraffes, you're probably researching for a school project, or hey, you're looking to see one at the zoo. Whereas if you Google tomato, just to give you a different example, it realizes that you might be more interested in how to grow them.
And Google can use that data about searches and what people are clicking on to really optimize their search engine and continue to improve it in ways that the other search engines can't compete with.
When it comes to general search, the judge made clear Google's exclusivity contracts are unfair to its competitors, to advertisers, and ultimately to consumers.
So Google has all of this distribution, it gets more users, it can improve its search results, it can therefore get all of the advertisers, which means that it gets more money, which means that it can keep paying for the default. So it's like a never-ending cycle that people can't break into.
There will be a second trial at some future date to determine what the government should actually do about Google's monopoly. But it's anyone's guess what that will be. The range is huge. It could be anything from asking Google to make minor tweaks to how it makes its deals, to ruling that those deals are completely illegal and have to be scrapped, to full-on just breaking up the company to break up the monopoly.
Maybe even a public education campaign where Google has to let users know that there are other search options, that it is possible to change settings. And that could be all wrapped under the umbrella of some sort of body that is set up to monitor Google's compliance.
I should mention, Google also plans to appeal this decision. On social media, Google writes, "This decision recognizes that Google offers the best search engine, but concludes that we shouldn't be allowed to make it easily available." It goes on, "As this process continues, we will remain focused on making products that people find helpful and easy to use." Which, to me, sounds like they're saying, we'll stay the course. Thank you very much.